So JD speaks, calling out AH's attempt at number 1, PR damage control, number 2, the attempt to influence the Court of Appeals. And what's hilarious is that JD is so effective that she shut down access to her argument to people outside of the court. Yeah, she had been using it as PR, trying to rally the troops. Now, it's offline. You can't look at it anymore. What's even better is how JD puts this on blast. You and I, we're going to talk about that and so much more today. Oh man, fun times, huh? Fun times indeed. All right, so hey there to all you fine folks on this fine day. By the way, I hope you are doing excellently. Pulling access to her amicus brief because she knows this thing, it will become a laugh track. I mean, that is beautiful. Now, we're reviewing JD putting on blast. I want to give props to DUI guy. He's the one that ended up giving us this laugh track, so props to him. Check out his channel. And remember, he's responding to flagrantly running PR campaigns, not only outside of the court, but inside of the court as well, trying to get all of these groups, including tabloids, those are your experts here. And the way that JD puts this on blast right from go is to say, number 1, this is a kitchen sink appeal, meaning that she has thrown everything plus the kitchen sink at JD, not only taking her appeal, but trying to add on an additional 93 pages of argument that is outside of this, trying to influence, trying to add 148 pages total, and she's trying to do this by relitigating virtually every major ruling made by 2 distinguished and highly respected chief judges over the course of a 3-year litigation and 6-week jury trial. Now, JD points out that she's not just doing this with one major law firm behind her. She's actually doing this with 2 major law firms. And in addition to that, she's trying to bring in all of these outside influences, trying to get them to influence the court. And JD wrecks this. And remember, when JD is doing this, he isn't just standing off with and her team. He's standing off with bringing in over 300 organizations, individuals, tabloids, and more, all trying to attack him. Well, he's saying they're doing this by cherry-picking information. They're not adding anything to the claims, and they're trying to say that is a representative of DV survivors, which was thoroughly shut down by the jury, who paid careful attention to the evidence presented during 6 weeks. Now, JD's call-out goes much, much further, too. I mean, he talks about the irrelevance of these people's argument. He says, I'm not even going to address the substance of most of this. Why? Because they're not interested in adding in anything legally. What they want to do is they want to argue with the jury. They want to talk about the impact that this is going to have either on society or victims in general, while they ignore everything about I want to read you this. I love how this is essentially a verbal body slam. Quote, JD will not address the substance of the amicus argument in detail in this opposition, other than to point out that the arguments in their brief are the most irrelevant to the legal issues. Irrelevant. You gotta love that on this appeal, and consists largely of disagreements with the jury's factual findings or complaints about the impact of the jury's factual findings on society in general. Now, JD goes much, much further in this call out too, and I want to read you this. Why? Because he notes how irrelevant these arguments are. He says, I'm not even going to address the substance of this in detail, but I'm going to point out here that you want to go after the jury. You want to pretend that this is going to have some chilling societal effect while cherry picking, while misstating evidence. Why? Because you want to ignore AH's conduct, her admissions, and her lack of credibility. Listen to this here. This is so good. Quote, JD will not address the substance of the amicus arguments in detail in this opposition, other than to point out that their arguments in this brief are for the most irrelevant to legal issues on this appeal and consists largely of disagreements with the jury's factual findings or complaints about the impact of the jury's factual findings on society in general. And that's the game AH's PR teams and the mainstream media have been playing. They say essentially, ignore what happened with Think about what this means for other people. Now, here is your call out of that, too. The amici, they cherry pick and they misstate evidence that they maintain supports their personal factual conclusions to argue that the jury got the factual issues wrong while ignoring the substantial evidence, including testimony of credible disinterested witnesses that was presented to the trial of fact about AH's conduct, about her admissions, and about her conspicuous lack of credibility. They ignore all of this stuff, instead expending many pages arguing that the jury's verdict is somehow harmful to victims in general. Again, ignore ignore what she did, think about everyone else. Now, personally, I think that this is one of the main reasons that shuts down access to her documentation. Why? Well, you not only have this argument put on blast, which is tearing down what she's saying, but if you read between the lines, it points out this major issue that came up in the trial where Elaine Rottenborn, they tried to argue that this wasn't just about what happened with JD and but rather with sending a societal message. And you're not supposed to try to influence the jury like that, and yet Elaine and Rottenborn did. But listen to this. I think this is a beautiful call out. Such arguments are wholly inappropriate on appeal. The court should not substitute its own judgment, much less the judgment of and pals. I love how that is added in right there. That's a big nay, nay, nay. You know, you're not supposed to put that in for the judgment of the jury. Likewise, this focus on perceived social harms that will result to victims generally from the verdict, that's both factually misguided. Why? Because JD won. He couldn't win if he did these things. But here's the problem for It's also an inappropriate argument. Now, why is it inappropriate? Because the jury, they're tasked with making a factual determination with respect to only the parties in the action. A and B, not sending a message to society at large. You have the case law that's added there. And remember, her team, they asked the jury to do that. That could be a problem. And JD finishes by saying, we don't want to waste pages on this. It's unfair if you make us waste space. Moreover, this back and forth, it's a non-issue. It's a distraction. Nothing would be gained from it. Yeah, they're a speed bump. JD points that out. And again, I think understands it well. She doesn't want you looking at her documents anymore. It's beautiful.